Have you ever asked yourself this haunting question? If you disappeared tomorrow, would it make any difference to your own soul? Would you leave knowing that you had lived even a single day for yourself, truly, unapologetically, and entirely? Most people never ask. They're too busy playing roles. The good daughter, the reliable friend, the high-achieving professional. They smile when they're supposed to, nod when expected, and laugh on cue. Outwardly, everything seems fine, but inside, it's a different story. Deep down, there's an ache, quiet but the kind that doesn't go away with success or approval. The kind that whispers late at night, "This isn't who you are." We live in a world that teaches us from childhood to seek praise, to avoid conflict, and to be liked. And so we adapt. We become who others want us to be. We filter our thoughts, our desires, even our dreams. We trade authenticity for acceptance. And somewhere along the way, we forget what it feels like to belong to ourselves. But here's the paradox. The more you try to be everything for everyone, the more invisible you become, especially to yourself. You are present in every room, every conversation, every obligation. But when was the last time you showed up for you? This isn't about rebellion, it's about reclamation. Because there is a difference between being kind and being compliant, between being generous and being lost. And if that difference remains unclear to you, chances are you haven't been living, you've been performing. And so I ask again, if you vanish tomorrow, would it matter to the real you? Or have you already gone missing? You want to be free, but you're trapped, not by chains or cages, but by a far more subtle prison, the opinions of others. Most people wouldn't call it a prison. They call it being considerate, well-adjusted, normal. They say, "I don't want to upset anyone," or "I just want to be liked." But under the surface, what they're really saying is, "I'm terrified of being disliked," or worse, "I don't know who I am without other people's validation." This is the silent epidemic of our time. Living your life as a performance, scripted by expectations you never consciously agreed to. You smile when you're sad, say yes when you mean no. Chase careers, relationships, even personalities that aren't yours, all in the name of being accepted. But here's the raw truth. Every anxiety, every frustration, every quiet misery that lingers in your life has one thing in common. It is rooted in your obsession with what others think of you. This is not just poetic speculation. It's the very premise behind the teachings of Alfred Adler, the Austrian psychologist whose ideas are at the core of the book, The Courage to be Disliked. Adler's central belief is radical in its simplicity. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems. Let that sink in. According to Adler, there is no such thing as purely internal suffering. All suffering stems, directly or indirectly, from your entanglement with how you're perceived, judged, or accepted by others. Think about your last sleepless night. Was it because you disappointed yourself, or because you feared how someone else might view you? Think about your greatest regret. Is it tied to your own values, or to failing a standard that was never truly yours? Adler's insight is surgical. The human desire to be liked is so powerful. It shapes not only how we behave, but who we become. We learn to predict what others want from us, and slowly, we edit ourselves down to a version that is safe, agreeable, palatable. In doing so, we abandon the parts of us that are inconvenient, rebellious, different. In short, the parts that are real. And here's where the suffering begins. Because every time you silence your truth to gain approval, you widen the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. Over time, that gap becomes unbearable. It feels like anxiety. It feels like emptiness. It feels like failure, even when everything looks successful on the outside. Kishimi and Koga, in The Courage to be Disliked, crystallize Adler's philosophy into one profound conclusion. Freedom is being disliked. Real freedom is not doing whatever you want. It's being willing to do what is right for you, even when it means others will disagree, disapprove, or walk away. True peace comes not from applause, but from the quiet clarity of living a life that is yours. And yes, it's terrifying. Because choosing to live authentically means confronting your deepest fear. That without external validation, you might not matter. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop chasing the need to be liked, you discover something far more powerful: self-respect. You realize that being disliked by some is the cost of being real with everyone, including yourself. This doesn't mean you become rude or selfish. It means you stop negotiating your worth. It means you stop molding yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. It means you finally stop asking, "Will they like me?" and start asking, "Do I like myself when I'm with them?" Because that's the root of all misery. Not being disliked, but being disconnected from yourself. And no amount of external praise can ever fill that void. So when Adler says all problems are interpersonal, he isn't blaming others. He's exposing a universal wound. We've forgotten how to live without permission. We've forgotten how to stand alone. We've forgotten that we are already enough, even when no one is clapping. The solution isn't to win more approval. It's to give yourself the approval you've always been seeking. To look in the mirror and say, "I choose me," even if they don't. At first glance, it seems obvious. People seek happiness. They want success, love, meaning, all for the sake of joy and fulfillment. But what if that's not entirely true? What if, deep down, the happiness people claim to chase is nothing more than a socially acceptable disguise for something else? According to Adlerian psychology, and as interpreted by Kishimi and Koga, most people aren't really pursuing happiness. What they're chasing is recognition, approval, permission. In fact, happiness isn't the goal, it's the bait, a tool used by the psyche to justify behaviors that are actually motivated by fear. This flips conventional logic on its head. You're not anxious because you might fail. You're anxious because on some level, you want to avoid trying. Why? Because trying and failing would expose you. It would threaten your image, your sense of control, your fragile place in other people's eyes. So instead of preparing for the job interview, the audition, the conversation, you procrastinate. Then you say, "I couldn't focus because I was anxious." But that anxiety didn't appear out of nowhere. Your unconscious created it to protect you. Here lies the psychological trap. Fear of failure isn't the enemy. Avoidance disguised as anxiety is. Let's look at a common example. A person dreams of starting a business. They read books, attend webinars, and talk about it constantly. But when the time comes to act, they stall. Fear creeps in. What if they fail? What will people say? So they delay, telling themselves they need to prepare more. Months pass. Nothing happens. Eventually, they quietly let go of the dream. Not because they didn't want it, but because the emotional cost of not being good enough was too high. But here's the twist. It's not the business they feared. It was the exposure. The moment where their real ability, their real value would be judged, not in their head, but in public. And if they failed, they wouldn't just lose the dream. They'd lose their identity as the person who could have made it. So the unconscious steps in, like a loyal but misguided friend, and says, "Let's protect you. Let's give you a good excuse. Here, take some anxiety, take some fear. That'll keep you safe." But safe from what? From growth, from vulnerability, from discovering who you really are, beyond the image. This mechanism is not unique. It's everywhere. The person who wants love but avoids commitment. The student who wants to graduate but never finishes the paper. The artist who wants to share their work but never hits publish. They all believe they're chasing happiness. In reality, they're avoiding rejection. Why? Because rejection isn't just painful. It threatens the fragile identity we've built on being good enough in the eyes of others. And if being seen is the only way we know we exist, then being rejected feels like death. That's why Adler insisted, your emotions are not random reactions. They are strategic creations. You feel what helps you avoid what you fear. And most of what you fear is not failure. It's being seen as failing. Let that sink in. You're not afraid of falling. You're afraid of being watched as you fall. So you sabotage yourself in advance. You wait too long. You overthink. You underprepare. Then you say, "I knew it. I wasn't ready." And in a twisted way, that's comforting, because it allows you to protect the image, the illusion that you could succeed, if only the timing were better. But in doing so, you abandon your potential. You give up before the world even has a chance to know you. This is not weakness, it's a strategy, just the wrong one. You think it will protect you from pain, but what it really does is rob you of peace. It keeps you locked in a cycle of almost living, where you're always one step away from truth, one decision away from yourself. The path out, it starts by recognizing the pattern, by asking, what am I really avoiding, and what emotion have I created to protect myself from it? Because once you understand that much of your suffering is self-authored, you can begin to write a different script, one that doesn't seek happiness as a cover, but as a consequence of courage, of action, of living in alignment with who you are, not who you hope others see. There's a subtle kind of prison, one without bars or locks, yet almost impossible to escape. It's the prison of needing to be seen a certain way, the prison of needing to be liked. Most people live there their whole lives without even knowing it. They decorate the cell with smiles, achievements, and carefully crafted personas. But beneath it all is the same fear. What will they think of me? Living for approval isn't just exhausting, it's dangerous. Because when your identity depends on how others perceive you, you hand them the remote control to your emotional state. One compliment lifts you up. One criticism tears you down. One silent disapproval, even imagined, is enough to spiral you into self-doubt. You're no longer living. You're reacting, waiting, performing, in the courage to be disliked. Kashimi and Koga put it bluntly. Being praised is receiving judgment, and judgment kills freedom. Let that sink in. Praise feels good, doesn't it? It lights up the brain, releases dopamine, and gives you that fleeting sense of I matter. But what is praise really? It's someone else telling you that you've met their standard, that you fit into their definition of good. And here's the trap. Once you start chasing that feeling, you become addicted to it. You adjust your behavior to get more. You suppress what doesn't fit. You smile when you want to scream. You agree when you want to walk away. Eventually, you don't know where they end and you begin. And when does the praise stop? You collapse. This is the hidden cost of seeking approval. It makes your worth conditional. It ties your sense of self to variables you can't control, other people's moods, biases, projections, and limitations. You become vulnerable not just to criticism, but to absence. The absence of attention, of recognition, of validation. This dependency breeds a constant low-level anxiety. Am I doing enough? Saying the right thing? Making them happy? It also breeds resentment. I did everything right. Why don't they see me? Over time, this resentment festers into envy, not because others have what you want, but because their approval from others confirms what you lack. You start to see life as a scoreboard. If someone else is praised, you must be losing. If they're winning affection, you must be failing. You begin to root for their mistakes, not because you're cruel, but because you've been programmed to believe that worth is a competition. And every success that isn't yours becomes a threat. But approval is not a limited resource. It only feels that way when you believe your value is something to be earned. This belief turns every relationship into a negotiation. You give in hopes of receiving. You sacrifice to be seen. And when others don't return the favor, when they don't match your efforts with praise or gratitude, you feel betrayed, used, invisible. But were you really giving? Or were you trading? This is how the need for approval corrodes intimacy. It turns a connection into a transaction. Every act of kindness carries an unspoken invoice. Now do the same for me. And when people don't pay up, you shut down. You stop giving, not because you're empty, but because you were never giving from overflow, only from expectation. So what's the alternative? It's not getting cold. It's not detachment or apathy. It's ownership. Radical, unapologetic ownership of your values, your choices, your presence. It's recognizing that not being liked is not a failure. It's freedom. Because the moment you stop trying to impress others, You start to attract the ones who are drawn to your truth, not your performance. And those are the relationships that last. The ones built not on approval, but on authenticity. Freedom begins when you realize you don't need to be understood by everyone to understand yourself. And that's the trade-off. Approval buys you comfort, but authenticity gives you power. The power to live, speak, and love from a place that doesn't ask for permission. The world doesn't need more people who are liked. It needs more people who are real. What if the problem isn't that you're chasing too much, but that you're chasing the wrong thing? Most people go through life trying to be accepted. They shape their personalities, choices, even their dreams around the hope of hearing one thing. You matter, you're enough, we like you. From childhood, they learn that approval means safety. That if they behave, achieve, and conform, they'll be rewarded with belonging. But here's the bitter truth. Acceptance is always temporary. It shifts with mood, with context, with people's changing needs. You can spend years trying to be liked by someone, only to be discarded the moment you stop serving their comfort. Because what people accept is rarely you, it's who you become for them. So what's the alternative? It's subtle but revolutionary. Instead of living to be accepted, live to be useful. This is the shift Kishimi and Koga highlight in The Courage to be Disliked. They argue that true happiness doesn't come from being praised. It comes from contribution, from feeling that your existence adds value even in small, invisible ways. That your presence makes a dent in someone else's world, not because they applauded you, but because you showed up as yourself. Being accepted is external. It depends on others. Being useful is internal. It's something you decide. Think about it. When was the last time you truly felt fulfilled? Was it when you received a compliment, or when you helped someone without needing one? When you felt seen, or when you saw someone and made their life better, even in silence? When you shift your goal from, how do I make them like me, to, how can I be of use here? Everything changes. You stop performing. You start participating. You stop chasing approval. You start building impact. You stop editing yourself for acceptance. You start expressing yourself from authenticity. And the irony? People begin to actually like you more. Not for the image you craft, but for the grounded presence you embody. But even if they don't, it doesn't matter, because your sense of worth no longer comes from their eyes. It comes from your hands, your heart, and our contribution. This is the kind of purpose that survives rejection, that outlives trends, applause, and expectations. Because usefulness doesn't expire. It doesn't depend on whether others recognize it. It simply is. A quiet, powerful truth you carry with you, even in solitude. But beware, usefulness must not be confused with sacrifice. You're not here to burn yourself out for others, or to lose your identity in service. That's just approval seeking in disguise. Real contribution begins with you, with knowing what matters to you, what skills you carry, what kind of presence you offer. Then, from that place of wholeness, you give. Not to be loved, but because you love. That's why this shift is so freeing. Because when your life is no longer about being chosen, you realize you've already chosen yourself. And that's enough. In a world obsessed with visibility, being useful is a quiet rebellion. It says, I don't need to be celebrated to make a difference. I just need to be present, intentional, aligned. Acceptance fades, approval fluctuates, but usefulness, grounded, sincere, and self-defined, endures. So choose wisely. Do you want to be liked temporarily, or do you want to live meaningfully? Only one of those leads to peace. Living for yourself has often been misunderstood. It's been painted as selfish, cold, or rebellious, as if choosing your own path automatically means abandoning empathy or connection. But that's not what it means, not even close. To live for yourself is to return to the most honest version of you. The version that exists when no one's watching, when no one is clapping, when no one is demanding, expecting, or guiding your every step. It means choosing truth over image. Alignment over applause. Depth over performance. It's not about rejecting others. It's about no longer rejecting yourself to please them. You're not selfish for wanting space. You're not unkind for saying no. You're not arrogant for honoring your boundaries, your pace, and your voice. These are not flaws. They are the first signs of freedom. Because true freedom is never about escaping others. It's about no longer being owned by their opinions. And that begins when you stop needing to be liked. This might sound strange, even threatening, in a culture that tells you your worth is measured by your likability. From school to social media, we're taught to build personas, not identities. We're praised for fitting in, not standing out, for agreeing, not disrupting, for being pleasing, not being real. But real peace, the kind that doesn't vanish when you're alone, comes from dropping the need to be perceived a certain way. It comes when you finally exhale and say, I'm not here to impress. I'm here to exist, fully, honestly, even if it makes others uncomfortable. This is the turning point. When you live for yourself, your choices stop being filtered through fear. You no longer ask, what will they think? You ask, what do I think? That's when life becomes yours again. Not a performance, not a me action, but a declaration. You start dressing the way you want, speaking the way you believe, creating what calls to you, not what's trendy. You start walking away from conversations that drain you and walking toward the ones that set you on fire. You stop waiting to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. But here's the paradox. The moment you no longer need to be liked, you become far more likable. Not because you're trying to please anyone, but because you're finally radiating something rare: authenticity. And authenticity is magnetic. It cuts through noise. It gives others permission to be themselves too. You become a mirror, a lighthouse, not by fixing anyone, but by being unapologetically whole. This is not a solo path. It's a sovereign one. When you live for yourself, your relationships deepen. Not because you're sacrificing more, but because you're bringing your truth to the table. No masks, no pretending, just you, raw, evolving, human. And that kind of presence nourishes others more than any performance ever could. But it comes with a cost. Some people will walk away. Some won't understand. They'll say you've changed, and they're right. You've stopped betraying yourself. You've stopped being the version of you they were comfortable with. And that's okay. Because the ones who stay, or the ones who arrive because of this version, they'll meet you in a deeper place. A place beyond roles and expectations. A place where love isn't based on who you pretend to be, but on who you are. That's the quiet power of living for yourself. It restores your soul and refines your circle. So no, it's not selfish, it's sacred. To live for yourself is to stop outsourcing your identity, to silence the noise, to listen inward, to move from alignment, and most of all, to trust that being true is more important than being liked. Because the need to be liked will make you agreeable, but the commitment to being real will make you free. What if the first real act of self-love is the refusal to be loved by everyone? That might sound harsh, even heartbreaking, but consider this. The day you stop begging for love from the outside is the day you begin to cultivate a deeper but unshakable love within. Not the kind of love that depends on praise or proximity, but the kind that survives silence, that endures solitude, that thrives even when no one claps. To be loved by all is a beautiful dream, but to be true to yourself is a sacred awakening. You don't need another like, another follower, another nod of approval to validate your path. You don't need someone to understand you before you start understanding yourself. You don't need permission to take up space. Speak your truth. Live your rhythm. What you need, and what most people spend their whole lives avoiding, is the courage to walk alone, even when being liked would be easier. Because here's the truth. When you stop living for how others see you, you start seeing yourself fully, clearly, And maybe for the first time, that's when everything shifts. You no longer perform, you participate. You no longer chase, you choose. You no longer survive through acceptance. You live through alignment. But make no mistake, this path isn't for the faint of heart. You'll lose things, approval, comfort, maybe even relationships that were built on your silence. But what you'll gain is infinitely more valuable, yourself. And with that, a sense of peace no one can take. So here is your invitation, not from me, but from the voice within you that's been whispering all along. Stop living through their eyes. Start listening to your own. That restless ache you feel, that quiet dissatisfaction, even in your most polished moments, it's not weakness, it's a signal. A call back home to your own voice, your own values, your own vitality. The world doesn't need more people who are perfectly likable. It needs more people who are undeniably alive. So let them misunderstand you. Let them walk away. Let them call you different, distant, difficult. That's okay. You weren't born to be palatable. You were born to be whole. And that begins now. Choose yourself, not in rebellion, but in reverence. Not because you're angry, but because you're awake. Say yes to the life that's been waiting beneath the performance. Say yes to a freedom that doesn't beg for recognition. Say yes to you. If this message stirred something in you, even just a spark, imagine what would happen if you kept listening to the voice within. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next awakening message that could change how you see yourself and the world. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment below and share. What part of this video hit you the hardest? What lesson are you walking away with? Your words might just be the mirror someone else needs today. You don't have to walk this path alone. We're building a space where truth is louder than noise, and you belong here, just as you are.